Hi, this is David Yager from Baja Knives. Thanks for tuning in. This is the third in our Methods of Work series on ox horn. We are working now with finishing and mounting the horn. The first two videos included basics and cutting, and then flattening and shaping of the horn. And this video builds on concepts that we worked on in the last two videos. So if there's something that's not making sense here, please check out the previous two videos. Thanks. All right, what we're looking at here is a couple of pairs of horn scales. These are flat and they have smooth backs. So they've been processed using the techniques that we talked about in the last couple of videos. These particular ones are pattern pressed, which is a tricky way of embossing them. And the bottom ones kind of look like stag, and the upper two kind of look like sheep horn. And this is something that I will be using in this demo. This kind of scale, I'll be using the ones that kind of look like sheep horns. But the thing to remember is that these are flat. They're flat on top and they're flat on the back, which makes them really easy to work. This is the piece we're going to be working with, and what I've done is placed it right next to a liner from the knife that I'm going to be building. Now, this is a Swiss Army knife, and they use aluminum liners, which I'm not terribly fond of, but they do work well. So it's important to understand that we're going to be using the liner from the knife to do a lot of our finish work here. So if you don't have liners in the knives that you're working with, you might want to check out another video because I'm going to be using the liner and referring to it over and over again here and referencing it in this video. So I've taken the liner and taped it with blue tape onto the scale that I'm going to be working. Now, you've got to always be very careful of your orientation. I've probably made 50 bad ones for 150 good ones because I screwed up the orientation. Probably not that serious, but enough to make me really frustrated and angry about it. And I double and triple check always at this point. So make sure the orientation is, we're looking at the outside of the scale and we're looking at the outside of the liner. So it's lined up, and what we're going to do next is take it over to the drill press and drill the holes. So the trick is using the liner as a template. We drill the holes on the drill press. Now I can use the drill press carefully and effectively because everything is flat on the back and it's flat on the surface too. Now I'm reminding myself that I am drilling through the finished face. So I'm not going to be drilling through the back first and then breaking through into the finished face. That sometimes ruins things because it'll take chunks out of the finished face. So I'm drilling the face and coming out the back with my drill press here, using the liner as a template, being very careful not to slip around and expand things that way. So here's the end of that operation. Here's the liner over on the left and the drilled out scale on the right. Now it's time to mark the material using the liner as a template. The trouble is the horn itself is kind of dark, and if I mark that with a mechanical pencil, it's going to be very hard to see. So what I'll do is put a piece of white masking tape over it in this case, and use that as the background on which I'll scribe my line that I'll then grind to. Now notice that I'm also using pins because my reference holes go away, but I am using pins to hold down the liner on the scale, and then I make my scribe. Okay, so at this point everything goes over to the disc sander. This is a 12-inch vertical disc. I'm working only on the left side of the left half of the disc, of course. This is a really cool tool for this kind of work because you can get very close and get right up to the line. Now I'm retaining the line, and that's important to remember, that I'm not making the line disappear. If I did, I wouldn't have any reference, and there's still a fair amount of little handwork to do. So I want to retain that line and then move on to the next process. And here's our semi-finished scale. It's got the holes drilled, it's got the perimeter roughly ground to it, and it's got a little bevel to it. That's what the white edge is showing. So that's a 45-degree bevel that does not come all the way to the far edge of the piece. For example, if this scale was a 1/4 inch thick, that bevel is only coming 1/8 inch deep along the outside perimeter. So I've got my original wide line there on the backside, still waiting to be cut exactly to the line. So the bevel is good to give me a starting place for my sanding and shaping, and that's going to be covered in a couple of slides more. Now this side's a little bit hard to see, but what I've done is I've bolted my scale onto my liner using really skinny nuts and bolts. Now the nut is embedded into the end of one of those, in the dowels. There's two little dowels. They're in the end of each dowel is embedded a nut, and I use that to turn to tighten it. So I've got a way of holding that piece of work without scarring it. I've got a little leather washer on the end, the head of the bolt, and so it's clamped on, and that's the very one that I'm going to use. The liner I'm going to be using is going to be shaped at this point. Back over to the sander now with the attachment. You can see how the scale itself, the dark scale, goes past the liner just above my thumb there, and that's what I'm grinding for. I'm going to grind that off, and I'm going to grind around the whole perimeter to make sure that we're flush with the scales. Here's another shot of the same thing. Now this is a point that is quite difficult to do by hand, to get your scale flush to your liner and make it a nice radius, make it a nice round radius. The dowel lets me do that, so I just spin the dowel between my fingers, and up comes the scale, and I'm working a very nice rounded radius at the end. Otherwise it sort of looks kind of faceted, and you have to work it some more. I mean, it's no great loss, but at this point you do not want to be cutting into your liner. That would ruin things to mess your liner up. You can touch it, just barely touch it, and that's okay. But you want to stay so you don't really do any damage to that liner. Taking it off now and putting it, using double stick tape, I'm putting it onto a wand that I use to help with the sanding and filing and polishing steps that are going to come next. Now I'm using a pretty cheap double stick tape on purpose. There's excellent double stick tape which I use doing lathe work, and it's very thin and very strong. I don't want something very thin and very strong, because if it is, I can break the scale trying to pry it off of there. So I use some cheapo stuff. It's like, for mounting picture frames or something, and it has a maximum weight capacity of 4 pounds. So that's fine. I can slap it on there, and it holds it nicely up in the air, and I can work with other tools while it's in that state. Okay, this is one of the last steps of the sanding procedure before mounting it. What we're looking at is the face of the scale, and the back is pressed down against a very rough sandpaper. Now I made a little handle out of blue tape that you can see you could grip that and slide it around on the sandpaper. I have a hard time with skinny things slipping around on the sandpaper. I end up sanding more off my fingers than I do off of the horn material. So this is a sure way to get off the little burrs and stuff that develop when you're drilling it on the drill press. On the back, you get little burrs, and it might even have warped a little bit as you're working it. So, using the sandpaper, you sand for 10 seconds, put it up against a straight edge against the light, and make sure that it's dead flat. And you work that until it's nice and ready to use. Here's the sanded back. Now I'm giving it a little coat of sealer. You need to do that with scales like this because it's absorbent. The horn will absorb moisture, and if there's stains, it'll absorb that as well. So I'm just using an easy water-based polyurethane quick drying sealer material to seal up the backs before installing the innards. And here we have it put back together again. All the pieces are in place, and I like to use brass pins, so I have pinned it up through the inside, and all the pieces are there working, ready to be snipped off and then peened over, and then do some final detail sanding on it. This is what it'll look like when we're finished. This is a compact model of a Swiss Army knife, which has the scissors and the much discussed hook. The hook is something that I have absolutely no use for, but apparently it comes in handy in some cases. In the second video in our series, the flattening and shaping video, I had a whole section on references and sources. And here's a new source. These guys are really a good supplier of bone and horn. And I got some bone from them. They call it red bone. And it's a really nice material to work with. Here's an example of what it looks like. Before that, though, check out the URL there, www.knifehandles.com. The company's name, Culpeper & Company. Here's a shot of the little red bone knife. It's got the scales that are jigged, they call it. This is a waiter model, Victorinox waiter. A pretty sparse knife. We have a model called the Flacco model, which is like this, that it has a Phillips instead of a corkscrew. This one has a lined corkscrew on it, which means that it's just a little bit older. In the previous video, the flattening and shaping video, I did some references to sources, as I just mentioned. Here is a book that I referenced, and we do have these on our website now. So if you check out our website at BajaKnives.com, you'll see that I've got copies of that there that could be really interesting for you, I think. So that's about it for this video. Thank you so much for coming by, and please do check us out. If you have questions regarding the use of horn, I'd be glad to help you if I can. Just write me at david@BajaKnives.com. Thanks again for stopping by.